let's talk shutter speed. You can't really use the analogy of the eyes with shutter speed because both our shutter speed and frames per second are hardwired into our brains. Frames per second, which is what you usually see in movies and feels normal to our eyes, is around 24 to 30 frames per second. And the 180 rule, which our brains and eyes are used to, puts our shutter speed at around 1/48th of a second to around 1/60th of a second. Where Aputure controls the depth of field or how much of your image is in focus, shutter speed controls motion. Different subjects move at different speeds, obviously. If you have something more static, like this bowl of fruit, and a tripod, you can be pretty flexible with the amount of variance in your shutter speed. If you're shooting wildlife photography, something like a hummingbird, and you want to stop their wings, you're probably going to want to be higher at a higher shutter. For example, around 1/2000th of a second. Typically when I'm walking around doing street photography, depending on how low the light is and how much ISO I'm willing to take on for the grain and noise in the image, I won't shoot below 1/60th of a second without a tripod for shooting people, because I know that I'm going to introduce motion blur if I go any slower than that. To explain shutter speed and how it affects motion in photography, we're going to use a tangerine. At aperture 1.2, shutter speed 1/50th, and ISO 100, you should see some blur when we take an image of the tangerine as it rolls by. If we increase the shutter speed from 1/50th to 1/200th, we should be able to get more details in the tangerine. If we double the shutter speed from 1/250th to 1/500th and increase the ISO to compensate, we should be able to stop the motion in the tangerine altogether and see a still rolling tangerine. Now finally, let's increase our aperture so we have more of the tangerine in focus. We'll keep the shutter speed where it is and slightly increase the ISO to make sure that the image is properly exposed, and see what we get.